Most translations give us meek, and most of us immediately picture something small, passive, the person who never pushes back, the one who absorbs every insult without a word. We have a modern word for that kind of person, and it isn't a compliment. So when Jesus sits down on that hillside and says, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth," we quietly assume this must be the beatitude for people who aren't strong enough to do anything else. But the Greek disagrees, and the disagreement changes everything. The word Matthew records is praus, spelled pi, rho, alpha, upsilon, sigma. This is the same word Aristotle uses in his Nicomachean ethics to describe the virtue that sits exactly between two vices, the vice of excessive anger on one side and the vice of having no anger at all on the other. For Aristotle, Praus is the person who gets angry at the right things, at the right time, in the right degree. Not the person who never gets angry, not the person who explodes at everything. The person whose anger is governed. The word also appears in the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures that Jesus quoted. In Numbers 12, verse 3, we read, "Now Moses was a very meek man, more than anyone else on the face of the earth." The Greek translators chose Praus for Moses, and Moses, let us remember, was the man who walked into Pharaoh's court and said, "Let my people go." Moses was not passive, he was praus. There is an image, the ancient world, attached to this word that has largely been lost in translation. Greek writers used praus and its cognates to describe a war horse that had been trained, broken in the old sense of the word, meaning brought under discipline. A war horse is one of the most powerful animals on earth, trained for battle, capable of charging through chaos, powerful enough to change the outcome of a conflict. But a war horse that cannot be guided by its rider is useless, worse than useless, dangerous to its own side. The breaking is not the destruction of the horse's power. The power is still there. The horse is still a war horse, but the power is now under the rider's direction. Praus describes that state, power that has been brought under authority, strength that has learned to take orders. When Jesus says, "Blessed are the meek," he is not saying, "Blessed are the people who have nothing to offer." He is saying something closer to, "Blessed are the people whose strength has been submitted to something larger than themselves." The theological tradition saw this immediately. Augustine, in his exposition of the Sermon on the Mount, places meekness second only to poverty of spirit and connects it directly to the soul that no longer fights against God. Not the soul that has no will, but the soul whose will has learned to rest in the divine will. This is Augustinian humilitas, not self-contempt, but accurate self-knowledge in relationship to God. Thomas Aquinas goes further in his treatment of mansuetudo in the Summa Theologica. Aquinas argues that meekness moderates the passion of anger, and that anger itself is not the problem. Unordered anger, anger that serves the self rather than justice, is the vice. The Praus person feels the anger but is not controlled by it. They use anger the way a surgeon uses a scalpel, precisely at the right moment for the right purpose. This is why the tradition never read meekness as weakness. What they heard in Jesus' words was, the people who have genuinely stopped fighting for their own territory, the people who have placed that fight in God's hands, are the ones the earth will ultimately belong to. Psalm 37 verse 11 says, "But the meek shall inherit the land and delight themselves in abundant peace." Jesus is not inventing a new promise. He is announcing its fulfillment. The long covenant promise of the land. the physical, real, tangible inheritance of God's people, belongs not to the ones who seized it by force, but to the ones who waited. So what does this look like from the inside, this week, in an ordinary life? It looks like the moment when you could win an argument and you don't. Not because you have nothing to say, but because you've decided that being right in this moment isn't the most important thing. It looks like absorbing an offense without immediately reaching for a response, not because you have no response, not because you are powerless, but because you have placed your vindication somewhere else. The meek person is not the person who has nothing. They are the person who has laid something down, and Jesus says, the earth belongs to them.